like the perfect height right here. Because I can just, yeah, just sit here like this. Yeah. We're just waiting because the live stream is going to start in about 30 seconds. So if you guys have friends who aren't here, you can tell them to watch on YouTube. On the church's YouTube channel, Justin created a Crazy Pepper class playlist. So they click on that playlist and all the classes are there. Mm-hmm. Super cool. Ben, you want to give me a thumbs up when we're live? Yeah, it's because they manually turn it on. Yeah. All right, guys, welcome tonight. This is our last prepper class, and I've really been looking forward to this because this is a skill I have been wanting to master for a while. So first, I'm kind of going to talk about how you make homemade jam. It's super simple and easy. And then after I'm done, Holly is going to teach us how to make homemade bread. So I'm really excited about that. She has a wealth of information. So for homemade jam, kind of the benefits and the pluses to making it yourself. One, it's super simple. Two, it's a lot better for you because you can buy your own fruit. You can grow your own fruit. You know where it came from. I think it has a much better taste. You can also kind of mix and match and make your own flavored jam if you like to make like a mixed berry jam or whatever your family likes. You can kind of make your own. So it's kind of cool. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to show you guys because it is very simple. So first thing, you're going to need pectin and you're going to need fruit. So there's a couple different kinds of pectin. This one is the Bowl brand. I just so happened to be at Smart and Final and saw this, and this was what they had in stock, and it was a couple of bucks cheaper than this one here. They both work pretty well. This one here, it's pretty much the same recipe. You really just add your fruit and your sugar to the pectin, and that's pretty much it. This one, someone just gave me, and she said this is the less or no sugar recipe. So if you're diabetic or trying to stay away from sugar, you might want to get this one here. And she said she actually freezes her jam, and she uses this one to freeze it. So let's talk about fruit. So you can use your fresh berries that you grow in your garden. You can use your berries you get at the farmer's market or the grocery store. I actually just use the frozen berries. I get like the organic ones from Costco. They're pretty reasonable. They can be in my freezer for a while until I have time to make jam. So I prefer using that. Other people, you know, they have full gardens. They love just using the fresh berries. That's awesome too. So what I did was I got these smaller jars to make the jam in. Because if you get a big jar, it might spoil before you get to the end of the jar. So I like the smaller ones. Also, pro tip, these make really great Christmas gifts for people at Christmas time. You could spend all day making jam and then give away little jars of jam. People love it. So basically, what I did is I followed this super simple recipe on the Ball website. You can find it. And what I did was I took my berries and because I was using whole strawberries, I kind of mashed them up just a little bit and then put them in the pot, warmed them up, and then I added in the pectin and just kind of stirred it in slowly. You don't want to dump it all in at once. And then I brought that to a boil, super simple. And then you just stir in your sugar and stir that in, bring it to a boil, keep stirring it for a little bit, and then turn off the heat and let it set. You're going to want to take your jars. This is the tricky part. Have you guys ever canned before? Anybody? Okay. So when you can, you have to make sure your jars are sterile. There's a whole process using like pressure cookers and different things like that. What I do is I put them in the dishwasher and turn it on a hot like rinse cycle. And because it gets so hot, it sterilizes the inside of them. And then I can keep the jars in the dishwasher until I'm ready to pour the jam from the pot into the jar. So it saves me a little bit of time. It makes it a little bit easier, and then I don't have to purchase like special equipment for all of that stuff. So basically, I run the jars just on a hot rinse cycle in the dishwasher and leave it shut. And then as soon as I add in the sugar and bring it to a boil, take it off the heat for just a couple minutes or so, not very long. Open the dishwasher, pull your jar out, and pour the hot jam into the hot jar. And then you seal the lid as tight as you can. Flip it upside down so it seals the lid really good. And then you just let it sit, and within maybe an hour or two, it's nice and thick. And you can see it's not very saucy. And then you can let it sit and cool. After the jar cools enough, you could put it in the fridge if you wanted to, if you were going to plan on using it soon and you want cold jam. Or you can put it in your pantry for a year. And it's there, and it's good. So, super simple. You might want to tweak the sugar-fruit ratio a little bit. If you like your jam a little bit sweeter, you might want to add a little bit more sugar. If you like your jam a little bit fruitier, you might want a little bit more fruit and a little bit less sugar. Just depends. You might want to tweak it a little bit and play with it. But that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. I don't have any special notes or techniques for you. The recipe, like I said, you can find it on the Ball website. Also, on the back of this box, they have the recipe as well. And that's pretty much it. Short and sweet. I think we are going to save questions for the end. So if you guys have questions or anything, just write them down, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. And then those of you who have made your own jam, if you have any tips or special recipes you want to share, you can do that as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Holly, because she has a lot more information to share with us.
Awesome. Hi, guys. Let me get my notes up here. Like Alyssa said, my name is Holly. For any of you guys who don't know me, I am Joe's wife, and we're going to talk about bread making. So, also I'm agreeing with Alyssa. If you guys have any questions, please write them down for the sake of the smoothness of the live stream. It'll just be easier if all the questions and answers are at the end. So, also, before I get started, I wanted to say that Alyssa thought up these prepper classes around the same time that her and I were having lots of on and off conversations about emergency preparedness and about homesteading skills, because we're both intrigued by those things. And this was back in January and February. Now, something that also happened around that time was right when the inflation hit. So now we had to figure out, how are we going to handle that? And this is where this started for me. For me personally, I wanted to investigate how realistic it was for me to make all of my own bread products instead of buying them. And where this determination came from was, I was back at the store back in January, and I was reaching for my usual loaf of organic bread for my kids, and I noticed that the price had jumped to $6.59 for that particular loaf of bread. And that's just not something that I can do for my 3 kids who eat all day, every day, and would wipe out that loaf within a day and a half. So, as I saw that, I could actually feel my face turning red with shock and anger, because I'm already a super cheap person to begin with. So to make something like bread that expensive just made for a pretty tense day for me. So I resorted to buying something like this. So this was $2, and I put it in my cart, and I was pretty angry about it, but I can't afford much more than that. So I kept walking through the store, and I actually bump into Alyssa. And I was like, this is a perfect person to vent all my anger to. So with a red face, I'm like, Alyssa, I can't do this. I can't afford bread. I can't afford groceries. What am I supposed to do? I don't want to settle for this $2 loaf because it's filled with so many plastics and preservatives, and I don't want this as an alternative to put in my kids' bodies as opposed to what I was buying that I can no longer afford. So this is what happened. I went home that day and I actually threw this loaf in the trash because I was still pretty angry. And I just looked up on the internet how to make sandwich bread. That's all that I really wanted to do. And not to sound cliche, but that is when everything changed for me. So I discovered this Christian family that lives in Idaho, and they have a YouTube channel and a website called... Where am I supposed to aim this? Over there? Is it on? Oh, no, go back. Forward. Okay. These guys are called Homesteading Family. Alyssa actually referenced them back in the first prepper class when she talked about water glassing eggs. That was also by these guys. So these guys are obviously a self-sufficient family. And the wife, Carolyn, had a video introducing the art of bread making. So that's what I clicked on. And she talked about what bread making was before the Industrial Revolution, when it was a real nutritious food that had no chemicals and was not commercially processed. And it was bread that was prepared not by specific recipes, and this is the key, but by age-old techniques. Because a written recipe with specific measurements unfortunately just is not enough information for you to make a good fluffy loaf of bread that doesn't fall apart, because bread is more complicated than that, as our great-great-grandmothers would probably testify. So this explains why, if any of you have ever made bread before, that one day it turns out amazing, and the next time you make it, that same recipe of bread, it falls apart, or it feels like a brick, and it's frustrating, because bread dough is affected very much by things like altitude and weather and humidity and many more things that change on a daily basis. So she explains that what you need to do when you're making bread is know how to read the dough and not so much the recipe. So that was intriguing to me. Now, on top of this, she started explaining how essential this skill was for emergency preparedness, and that intrigued me even more. And then I found out that she had a master class available for bread making, which is what this is, and I bought it. And between the saved money and the nutrition I was able to add and the emergency preparedness aspect of it, this is what I was going to be into. I signed up for this, and I can tell you I have not purchased a single bread product since January, and I have many, many reasons for that. So, all that to say, I'm not an expert on this. I've only been doing this for about 6 months. But I can tell you that from sandwich breads to sourdoughs to rolls, pizza doughs, cinnamon rolls, tortillas, whatever you can think of, even hot dog buns, I've only been making them at home. And I've learned so much, I've saved so much, and I don't see myself buying bread from the store anytime soon. So, I'm excited to share with you at least what I know, and I hope you can have some benefit from it. Starting back with my story in January, one of the first things I was obviously wondering, which you may be wondering too, is when I knew I didn't want to buy bread from the store anymore, is it actually cheaper to make good bread at home? And how much cheaper is it? Because back then, that was right when the inflation hit. I'm only in it for the money at this point. And I didn't want to compromise the quality of what my kids were eating. So, learning from the masterclass that I had mentioned, and I will talk much more about at the end, I discovered that all you really need for a basic bread recipe that makes many different bread products is flour, yeast, sweetener, oil, and salt. All of those things considered, it boils down to the cost of about $1 per loaf or $1 per bread product. So, those facts alone was enough to convince me that this is what I wanted to do. But something else that people may be wondering is, isn't making bread super, super time consuming? So here's my honest experience. Just like any other new skill that you really want to incorporate into your life, it's very time consuming and takes every ounce of your brain power until you get the hang of it and until you get a little better at it. And once it becomes a part of your routine, that's just what it is. It's a part of your routine. So 6 months ago, I was making breads like every other day, and I was trying to schedule my day around when the breads were rising, and that was really, really stressful. But now I make most of my breads once a month. And I make it all on one day. I put most of it in the freezer. And depending on what I want to eat in the week, I will put that in the fridge and just pull out of the freezer whatever I need when I need it. On a weekly basis, when I do my meal planning and I'm deciding what do I want to eat this week, if I need something like dinner rolls or I need something like hamburger buns, what I would do is I would make a big batch of it. So there's 5 of us in my house, so I would make a dozen hamburger buns. I'd put half of them away in the freezer for another day, and I would use the other half for tonight. So there's ways to make it so much more abundant where you're not just cooking every single day unless that's what you would want to do. And what I would find is that everything I put in the freezer froze extremely well. I took it out a month, sometimes even 6 weeks later, just in a gallon bag, and let it sit in the fridge overnight, and it would toast and it would do everything amazing, just like I just pulled it out of the oven. It was amazing. So, is making homemade bread super time consuming? The honest answer is it was at first and it's not anymore, if that makes sense. Now, of course, something else that I had plenty of experience with is plenty of trial and error. So I have had beautiful loaves. I have had loaves that looked like this. I have had loaves that I've burnt to a crisp and just thrown apart, which obviously has nothing to do with bread making, just cooking issues. And I actually attempted at making cereal once, and this is pretty much what happened. So I don't have advice for you there. But with all of that considered, I'm finally getting some skills down due to this bread making masterclass that I am in. I have found it to be essential, and I'm only finding more and more reasons through this class that's continuing to hook me on making my own bread. Just even things like knowing that loaves of bread from the store, like this is going to be formulated to have the longest shelf life possible while using the cheapest ingredients possible. And how they do that is by adding tons of ingredients that you would never put in your bread at home, like food dyes and bleach and dough conditioners with bromide in it, which is a known thyroid disruptor, and tons of preservatives and extra sweeteners that are just terrible for you that I don't really want my kids eating. But this is the interesting thing. The basic ingredients that I mentioned earlier, they store tremendously well. The things like the flour and the yeast and the sweetener, those things store extremely well in and of themselves for a long time. And then when you put them together in a loaf of bread, it's completely fresh. On top of that, when you are the one making the bread, you see everything that you put into it. And because of that, you now have the ability to make it as nutritious as you desire. Because this is something else that I was wondering when considering if the skill of bread making was worth all of the effort, and wondering if it was a valuable skill for emergency preparedness. Because most people I know, especially women, try to avoid bread completely, and you for sure could not survive off of the bread you get from the store because it's just not nutritious enough. But then I started wondering about something else, okay? Way back in the book of Genesis, when Joseph was made second in command in the land of Egypt, you know the story, and there was 7 years of famine. But prior to the 7 years of famine, there was 7 years of plenty in accordance with Pharaoh's dream. And as Pharaoh explained this dream to Joseph, Joseph advised him to store up 1/5 of the grain of Egypt during the years of plenty so they would not perish when the years of famine came. So Pharaoh sees the wisdom in this. He sets Joseph as second in power, and they store up the grains most likely in the silos of that day. And we read in Genesis 41 that the 7 years of famine had began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. And yes, it's the Hebrew word lechem, which means bread, loaf, wheat, or grain. So I'm thinking about these things, and remembering these things had me wondering, how did the wheat and the grain stay good for so long with only what they had back then? And how is it nutritious enough? Now, of course, I'm not saying that I think these guys only ate bread and only ate grains exclusively for 7 years, but what you can't not realize is that the grains and wheats that they were storing were essential for sustaining the lives of the people of that time, which was exactly why God had set Joseph in power, because he always takes care of his people. And bread was the way that he was going to do it. But this loaf is not going to do that type of job. So, what in the world kind of bread were they eating back then, is what I wanted to know. And this is where you can start getting really, really nerdy with the different types of wheats and ancient grains, einkorn, spelt, and kamut, which is actually an ancient Egyptian grain, and the many health benefits and the nutrient density that they contain. But for the sake of the grabbability of this class and for the sake of what I actually know from experience, we're going to start back at level 1, which is talking about making breads from just flour you get from the store. So, of course, all-purpose flour is going to be the easiest to work with. And it's great for things like hamburger buns and desserts and things like that, but it's obviously not very healthy. Wheat flour is more healthy, and if all you ever do, and this is important, if all you ever do to make homemade bread is to stop buying processed bread and just use flours that you get from the store, you have already saved tons of money, and you've removed the ingredients of commercial processing that harm your body with insecticides and herbicides and artificial sweeteners, dose stabilizers, and tons of other genetically modified ingredients. You've taken all of those out just by using flour from the store. All of those things are instantly removed. So that is already the accomplishment. But after that, if you want to keep going, you might want to start getting higher quality wheat flour. But when you look into that, that's when the price is going to start going up again. And also, and this is good to know, by law, in order for wheat flour to have a shelf life, the germ and the bran are to be removed from the wheat. And that's because once the whole wheat berries are ground and the bran and the germ will eventually start to go rancid. And when they go rancid after so long of time, they can turn carcinogenic, which causes cancer, and of course nobody wants that. But at the same time, when the germ and the bran are removed, it takes with it about 90% of the nutrition out of your wheat flour. So if you wanted to take bread making to the next level of real nutrition, while at the same time not paying a pretty price, that's when you would consider grinding your own flour from your own wheat berries. While the germ and the bran are still in there. You would make the breads while the germ and the bran are still in there, but it's long before they would ever have the risk of going rancid. And this is actually where the biggest money-saving aspect comes in and where the biggest emergency preparedness aspect comes in. So to explain, this is 25 pounds of what's called hard white wheat berries. So this cost me about $40 on Amazon, but man, has the price gone up since I got that a few months ago because times are a little crazy. However, just this bucket right here is enough for me to make a loaf of bread a week for my family for the rest of the year. And I know that because I got my first bag, my first 25 pounds back in January, and that's what these are made out of. I just finished it. So it lasts quite a long time. So, of course, in addition to that, in addition to the wheat that I have, I do use a lot of all-purpose flour in my other bread products. But all-purpose flour is still pretty cheap, and it stores for a long time even when it's already ground because it's just all-purpose flour. There's no nutrition in it to go bad. I can keep something like that on my shelf for 8 months. And if I wanted to stock up on it, it would keep in the fridge or freezer for years and years. That's what all-purpose flour can do. Now, if you wanted to stock up on whole wheat flour from the store, it's only going to stay good for a few months and maybe a year in the freezer. But the thing is, you might not want to use your freezer space just on wheat flour, and especially not if you know that the wheat flour has 90% of the nutrition removed because the bran and the germ are not there. However, these wheat berries, I just keep in the closet. And because they are not yet ground into flour, all the nutrition of the germ and the bran will stay packed in there. And I can keep this in the closet with all of that nutrition, not taking up any freezer space for a year or even longer if you wanted to get one of those food-grade storage buckets with the big gamma seals on it and keep it in a back cold closet somewhere. It would last much longer than that. And the reason that these wheat berries are so self-preserving is because they contain something called phytic acid. Now, I'm not super nerdy on this, so I'm just going to repeat what I've learned. Phytic acid prevents the wheat berries from sprouting, which is good. That's why they stay good for so long. However, you do not want to eat phytic acid because it is an enzyme inhibitor, and it's an anti-nutrient. And there's a lot more information on that if you would ever want to consider getting the same masterclass, which again, I will talk about more in the end. But anyway, you don't want to eat phytic acid. Because you don't want to do that, you want to get rid of it on your wheat berries before you eat it. And you can do that by making something like sourdough. The process, that's not sourdough, where is it? Where'd it go? Like sourdough. This process of fermenting sheds the phytic acid and makes it more nutrient dense. Another way to do that is by sprouting the wheat berries yourself, which is just a short process of soaking and rinsing the wheat berries in water a little at a time until they sprout. That's why when you see breads at the store and they're sprouted, that's like a big deal, because the phytic acid is not there. It's gone. When they sprout, you know the phytic acid is gone, and you would go ahead and dehydrate the wheat berries in a dehydrator or in your oven, which is a little tricky. That's what I started doing at first. And then you would grind your sprouted wheat into flour. But what this obviously points out is that I have a dehydrator that I got on Amazon for about $30. And I have a nice wheat grinder that I got for about, this was about $270 on Amazon, which is obviously an investment. But as cheap as I am as a person, I have no regret buying these. Because if this ever happens again, I know that for my family, at least in the area of bread products, I won't notice. And that's pretty nice. If this bucket was all that I had access to for the rest of the year, I could still have bread on the table. And that's a pretty good feeling. But it doesn't end there. These tools that I have also equipped my family to be able to help other families if there was ever a need for that. And this is something that Alyssa mentioned in the first prepper class, that when it comes to preparing for emergencies, we should have enough to share. We should have enough to give away. Because obviously in these last few years, people are afraid. They're afraid of what's to come. And they're afraid of how uncertain the world is becoming. But what if you can show up to a fearful family with bread? And through that, you can share with them that this world is not going to last forever. But there is peace and there's triumph in the blessed hope of Jesus, who loves you so much and took your sin upon himself because he loves you, so that you can be forgiven and you can now rest in the certainty of his hands instead of the uncertainty of this world. If you can share all of that because you had some bread to bring over, well, that now makes this skill much more valuable than just to save money, doesn't it? You know, something that my husband Joe told me, he said that the only superpowers that humans actually have is knowledge. And what a tool for the kingdom of God that can be. So listen, this is all that I can really give you on bread because making bread takes so much techniques. Now, before you ask questions, if you even have any questions, I want to talk a little bit more about this masterclass that I have been bragging about, if you are interested. On the Homesteading Family website, under the classes section, you will find the art of homemade bread. This class offers extremely thorough video lessons explaining every step to making all different kinds of breads, all different kinds of bread products, your sourdough starter, how to do this whole wheat thing, the information, how to store it, the emergency aspect, and all of those. If you purchase this class, you would own the video lessons, which means you would have 24/7 lifetime access to them to watch over and over again, which I have definitely done. You would have access to digital books, tons of recipes. You can submit questions that are answered the next day by experts, because I have plenty of experience with that as well, and so much more information that I have found tremendously valuable when it comes to emergency preparedness. So listen, and I want you to listen carefully. At full price, this class is $200. But, and I'm going to sound like a sales lady right now, I have a small inside connection with Homesteading Family, and I've been in contact with them, and they have agreed to give me a discount code to share with you. And this blew my mind, because I was like, oh, 15% off, please, that would be amazing. She didn't give me a coupon code for 10% off, or 20, 30, 40, or even 50% off. She gave me a coupon code for 75% off the whole course, which would bring the price down to $49.75. Okay, I paid full price for this, and I regret nothing. So I really hope that you guys will get this entire class at $50, okay? Now, here's the thing. I have the coupon code here on the table, and it is only for you guys who are present. It is not allowed for anyone online, and it is not to be shared with a lot of other people. That was the terms that I had to agree with Homesteading Family. So, if you buy this course, if you want to come up here, after we're all done with questions and answers, and take a picture of this code, please tell me if you buy the class, because it would make me super, super excited. Now, with all of that being said, do you guys have any questions? Or comments? Or tips, like Alyssa was saying? Yes? Okay, so at what point did I decide to do the wheat berries and the grinder? I think it was just slowly going through this class that convinced me for the emergency aspect of it, because wheat flour can't store for that long, and because of the nutrients that are added to the bread. Knowing that I can store this for a long time, that it, like I said, if all I had was this and this for the rest of the year, I could have bread, that made me really excited. And so, and it was my birthday, so my husband got this for me. So, if that answered your question. Anyone else? Yeah. The dehydrator, how I use the dehydrator is, I use this after I sprout my wheat berries. So I sprout the wheat berries by soaking them in water, rinsing them every 12 hours until they sprout. But obviously they're wet, so I can't grind them if they're wet. That's when I would layer them in the dehydrator, and I put like parchment paper down so that they don't fall through. And I plug it in at about 160 degrees overnight. And by when the morning comes, they're nice and hard and ready for me to grind. So, anyone else? Yeah. So I grind about once a month, because I actually made these 4 loaves today, and this will be like a good wheat supply, sandwich, toast supply for my family for the next month. And so I would usually just time sprouting my wheat berries for me to grind the whole batch that I sprouted, and then this took every bit of what I ground this morning. So did that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else, or any like tips or questions for Alyssa or anything like that? Okay, so do I make large portions of flour at a time? Not really, because once the sprouted wheat berries are ground, they too will start losing their nutrition. And the longer you have that flour, the longer the risk is of it going rancid, and you don't want to do that. You can't, what I have done is if I have extra flour, if I don't want to make quite this much, I can put it in the freezer and it will freeze very, very well for like a month. So you have like a month to use it in there. But it's best to only grind what you are going to use that day is the best goal, I should say. Okay, yes, I do not store the dough. I bake everything at once, put it in a Ziploc bag, put it in the freezer or the fridge, depending on when I want to use it. Yeah, so the different kinds of bread. So this is just like a wheat bread. I made this morning after using this. I sprouted these a few days ago, and I ground it this morning, and I made them. So this is just wheat bread. This is sourdough that I've made from my sourdough starter over here, and yeah, I was going to try to make hamburger buns today, and it did not happen, but you know, those are the two types of breads I have up here. There's a couple different kinds of grains. This is a winter white wheat. This is a red wheat that I actually have not used yet, so I'm excited to experiment with that. And this is an ancient grain called farro, which I also have not used yet. Something else that I've learned is that the ancient grains are pretty pricey, which kind of bummed me out. But what is very cheap are white wheats, and red wheats are still at about $1 to a pound. So that's nice. Yeah, in a nutshell, what a sourdough starter is it's a portion of flour and a portion of water, and you mix it, you leave it on your counter, and like the next day you'd give it more flour, more water, mix it, and you would do that once or twice a day for like a month, and it ferments on your countertop, and that's what turns it sour. And then when you would want to make your sourdough bread, you would take like half a cup of that starter and follow whatever sourdough bread you have. And because at that point, you know, obviously, if you're using sourdough starter, you don't need yeast because it is yeast. It's a leaven. And, you know, fact of the day, if you ever read about leaven in the Bible, it's not talking about yeast. It's actually talking about something like this. So, if that makes sense. Yeah. So how do I know when it's starting to go rancid? I don't know. I haven't been, you know, like I said through this course, I've been very warned of it going rancid, and I've done everything I can to not let that happen. It will only go rancid after you grind it. So when you have something like this is after you grind this is something you want to use as soon as you can, or you can keep it in the freezer for up to a month. When it starts going rancid, I don't know. I'm glad I don't, if that makes sense. It's just good to use it as soon as you can. I would assume that it would have a bad smell, yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard that. That sounds really cool, though. Yeah, it's crazy. I've had this since like January. It's weird. Like you just hang on to it and you add more flour and water, like, you know, and you take some for a recipe and you just hang on to it for a long time. It's kind of weird. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. The difference between all purpose flour and bread flour, I have no idea. I use bread flour for hamburger buns and hot dog buns because the recipes I have for those call for bread flour. Um, Whenever I don't have bread flour, I just use all purpose flour for those recipes and it seems to turn out the same. I don't know. Does anyone know the difference? There's more gluten in bread flour? Okay. Okay. Maybe that makes sense. Makes it puff up a little more. Yeah. So the sourdough, you can kind of do whatever you want. What I like to do is use half wheat flour and half all-purpose. But I mean, you can do all-purpose. You can even do, and something this class goes into is you can make sourdough out of pure whole wheat, sourdough out of like kamut flour if you want to go that route, sourdough even out of like quinoa if you're gluten intolerant, and things like that. It can kind of be whatever you want. It's just up to you. Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, it's yummy. All purpose flour is really yummy. So, yeah, I use all purpose flour for just, I mean, everything's in your control. You can do whatever you want. I've made dinner rolls out of all purpose flour and I've made dinner rolls out of wheat flour and it just, or half and half. I mean, it's so much cool. It's really cool how much power you have once you can do whatever you want. So, yeah, I do buy it. I do buy it. I did ask like how do I make my own all purpose flour? Well, like what even is that? And she just said the expert that responded to me, she just said you would take your wheat flour and you would get a fine sifter and you'd sift out all of the wheat granules and whatever is out there would be the equivalent to homemade all purpose flour. So I haven't tried that yet, but you know, someday. Yeah. I don't have a bread maker. No, I'm making everything just in my oven from normal bread pans. Uh huh. Yes, yes. So, and letting it rise obviously does take a little bit of thought, but if I dedicate one day a month, like I was saying, to just being at home and having everything rise and being put into the oven, your house just smells amazing that day if you can be home, you know? So, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, hold on. You in the back. You can go first. Okay, so it is a bunch of mini videos that are like 8 to 20 minutes long, and there's 56 of those videos that you can pick and choose whatever you want to watch. You know, obviously you don't. It's not like a Zoom call. You know, you have access to it. It's pre-recorded. You can readdress it whenever you want. So there's a whole bunch of those. It covers a lot, and I love it. Yes, and this is becoming a problem. For me, after getting this bread class, I found out that she has an herbal medicine class, and she has the dairy class, and she has, oh man. So yeah, I'm my poor husband. I'm like, can I just get one more class? But yeah, so yeah, once you go on their website, it's pretty fun to look around. So, Claire, did you have a question? Mm. I actually have a question for Alyssa, and I'll repeat your answer to the microphone, I guess. How much does it cost to make one of those? What's the cost of making a jar of this? Do you know? Okay. Okay. $3 a box for 40 ounces of jam. That's cool. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, plus sugar. It does take quite a bit of sugar. For this jar, it was like 1 2/3 cup of sugar. So it takes quite a bit of sugar. But you can buy like a 50-pound bag of sugar at Costco or something. It's pretty inexpensive. This I think was like $4 or $5, and I think the ratio is pretty close to the same. It's like 1.5 tablespoons for 16 ounces. I think, of jam, and there's like a lot in here.
Cool.
It's pretty inexpensive.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Jacqueline makes apple butter. That's cool. I love her apple butter. She gives it to me at Christmas time. It's pretty great. Anyone else? Before I put the microphone down. I know. Okay, well, I think we're done. So, if any of you want this code for the bread class, come take a picture or take notes.